My baby dolls, we are here back again. Another episode of Genesis. Today we got a stellar show. We got renowned author Dan Schlossberg on the line. And I'll tell you, his new book, The New Baseball Bible, for anyone who likes nostalgia or trivia or anything to do with baseball for that matter, you got to get this book. For me, I'll tell you right now, it's like being a kid in a candy store just thumbing through this book. And we're going to get to the book, and we'll get to Dan in just a second. Of course, as always, I am your host, Ian Kahanowitz. You are listening to the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network with the Zigzag Man, Ralph Tycho, and, of course, we have plenty of great shows on field. We have Mike and Mike at midday with Mark Weiss and Mark Littell. Great new show. A lot can be learned from there. I'm also on the Dave Nemec old-time baseball and trivia with renowned Sabre historian Alan Blumpkin, and, of course, renowned author Dave Nemec. And that's a good show. And me and Ralph, we do Oakland A's baseball and also Giants baseball, going back to the New York Giant days. And just a little bit about the new baseball Bible, which was fantastic. I even love the subtitle to this: Notes, Nuggets, Lists, and Legends from Our National Pastime. And let me tell you something, folks. Anything you want to know about baseball is here. And by what I mean by that is Dan put in, for God's sake, scorekeeping in this book. How to sit at the ballpark and scorekeep. Umpires, rules, little oddities that I even didn't know, and that's what makes this book so special. But I do want to read what the book covers. The book covers the following topics: beginnings of baseball, rules and records, umpires, how to play the game, strategy, equipment, ballparks, famous faces. Of course, we'll get into Hank Aaron, and Dan is a huge Braves fan, and I think even that's an understatement. He has his own Facebook page, Braves Banter, and he has a show by the same name. And we're going to get into Babe Ruth and famous managers, executives, trades, the media, big moments in history, the language of baseball, superstitions and traditions, spring training. We're going to learn that spring training used to be a picnic and not the hard workouts they have today. Today's game and so much more. I mean, this book, you just can't pass it up. It is truly the Bible. And, of course, Dan Schlossberg is a former AP sports writer. He's the author of 37 baseball books, including When the Braves Ruled the Diamond, which I'm probably going to be getting soon, and we'll have him back on the show. Designated Hebrew, the Ron Blumenberg story, the first DH. I also have in my collections the 300 Club. Have we seen the last of baseball's 300-game winners? The baseball editor of Latino Sports. He writes for USA Today, Sports Weekly, New York Natives, New Jersey Lifestyle, and various Boston Red Sox publications, amongst other. An unabashed Braves fan, like I mentioned before, Dan has followed the team closely as both a fan and a sports writer for more than 50 years. And there's a lot of Braves in this book, and anyone that's a Braves fan, you'll like the book as well as any other fan. Without further ado, welcome to the show, Dan.
Thanks, Ian. Great to be talking with you.
Now, let me ask you something. This links us back to 1980 when you released the baseball catalog. Why did you feel that it's time to update us after 37 years?
Well, there have been other updates periodically, but none since 2002. The book has actually gone through 3 titles and 3 publishers. But it really needed an update because even since 2002, so many things have changed in baseball. For example, the wild cards. 2 wild cards. Teams have changed leagues, new commissioner, trades, all kinds of stuff that's happened since 2002. So it was really time. But the biggie was the Chicago Cubs winning the World Series. I never thought in my lifetime that would happen.
And you know something? Do you credit that to Theo Epstein building the club, or would you say, hey, Madden was able to get what he had, worked with it, and created a good team?
It was really a combination because when you compare the Cubs, the manager and the GM always work together, like the Braves with Bobby Cox and John Schuerholz winning those 14 straight division titles. So Theo Epstein really built the team, but Joe Madden ran the team. So they needed each other. And Joe Madden, came over. He saw the potential in some of the things that Theo Epstein was doing. And they really hit the jackpot last year. They may have trouble repeating, though.
Yeah, they're doing so. I'm surprised that the Yankees are doing as well as because they're in a rebuilding phase, and the kids seem to be playing well. Atlanta, they made some really good moves in the off season. They got Dickey from Toronto, and they got Bartolo Colon, who, what do you think about their staff now and where the Braves are going to be?
Well, I must disagree with you, Ian. Those two moves are awful. Bartolo Colon has made 11 starts. 9 of them have been very bad. His earned run average is 6.99. And the interesting thing here is Bartolo Colon bobblehead day at SunTrust Park is June 9th. I do not think he's going to be there for that.
Wow. How do you like that? They're going to get rid of him beforehand. Have you been to SunTrust Park yet?
I'm going down on June 24th because I'm the keynote speaker at the Braves 400 Club annual authors luncheon.
Oh, fantastic. I heard it's a beautiful ballpark. I mean, I've seen the stuff online, and, and I'm sure, I know you were to Turner Field and Fulton County, but this, I hear, is really a treat. Now, they have something strange here. Like, you can, pay something like $2 for a lifetime ticket and have something strange I read about what people could do in SunTrust. I don't know if you know about that.
No, I have not heard that.
Yeah.
$2 sounds like, sounds a little strange. I mean, $2 times what?
Yeah,
I mean, $2 times how many years,
Well, you know what I think? If memory serves me correct, if you buy a yearly pass, I think all the refreshments are $2. I got to look that up, but that's something odd that I figured that you might like if you bought a season ticket there. You go back to the dead ball. You even go back before the dead ball era here. Let me ask you this question. Sudden death home runs. The Monero never knew about this, but it was done in the dead ball era.
Well, there weren't very many home runs in the dead ball era either, so that's something else to consider. But Babe Ruth had balls that actually bounced and went into the stands and were counted as home runs. They were not, that 714 figure is what he hit over the fence. But in those days, there were balls that bounced, would be ground rule doubles today, and they were considered to be home runs.
It's amazing, the old rules. Of course, in the dead ball era, I mean, when we talk about it, they used one ball, whole game. The ball was spit on. It looked like a head of cabbage by the time the 5th or 6th inning came, so it was hard to hit. Not a lot of people understand the balk rule and its importance. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your research on the balk rule here?
Well, the balk rule, basically, for people that might not know, it's sort of to help base runners or base stealers, because the pitcher can do all kinds of things to deceive base runners, and that's why they put the balk rule in, so that certain moves a pitcher could not make without risking the runner advancing automatically to the next base. And balks are pretty rare these days, although there's an umpire named Bob Davidson whose nickname is Balk-a-Day Davidson, because he calls more balks than anybody else, probably averages a balk a game. So that's kind of interesting. It's an unusual rule, and there's also catcher's interference. There are all kinds of things where they're rarely used, rarely called, but they do influence the game here every once in a while.
And something, I love how your book moves, and one of the things that a lot of people don't know, but baseball historians do know, is the old you got to touch second base rule. You got to go touch the base even when the run scores. And a perfect example, which you cite in your book, which is so important, especially in the dead ball era, is Merkel's Bona. Let's explain that.
Right. And also I want to mention the Harvey Haddock's perfect game, the strange ending of that. Well, Merkel's Boner, that influenced a lot of things in baseball history. First of all, that game wound up in a tie. It should have been an easy 2-1 win for the New York Giants. That game wound up in a tie, and the Cubs won the playoffs and went to the World Series that year in 1908. But I want to get to Haddock's game, too, because that was a perfect game for 12 innings until the 13th inning when Don Hoke made an error, and then he was bunted to second. Then there was an intentional walk, and then Joe Adcock hit the ball over the fence. You would think a game-winning 3-run homer. It was the only hit of the game. But Hank Aaron got so excited. He was one of the base runners. He got so excited seeing the ball go over the fence that he went directly from second base into his dugout without rounding third and coming home. And the umpires eventually ruled that it was a 1-0 win instead of a 3-0 win.
Wow. Yeah. And
So Edcock got deprived of a home run because at the point between second and third where he technically passed Hank Aaron, he was called out.
Wow. That's something. And, of course, with Merkel, I'll let you tell the story about Merkel.
Well, yeah, the Merkel thing, that was kind of an interesting incident, too. And Al Bridwell and Moose McCormick, it's early in the morning for me here, and I don't recall all the vivid details of something that happened in 1908, but it's certainly in my book. And, I'm much more well-versed with things that happened later. But I am a baseball historian, too. It's just a little bit too early for my mind to come up with that right now, Ian.
I'll tell you what. How about if I give it and I'll jog your memory?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
I'll refresh your memory like I tell people understand. It happened on September 24th, 1908, and I'm reading right from your book. I'm quoting. The Giants and Cubs are fighting for the National League pennant. They were locked in a 1-1 tie in the ninth inning at New York when the Giants put Moose McCormick on third and Fred Merkel, who was a rookie, on first with 2 outs. Albert Bridwell drilled a hit to center field, and McCormick raced home with the apparent winning run, and that's fine. But Merkel, seeing him score just like Aaron, stopped short of touching second base and headed for the clubhouse. Cubs first baseman Frank Chance saw what happened and screamed for the ball. He knew he could touch second and make Merkel the victim of a forced play, thus ending the inning with the score tied. Giants pitcher Joe Ironman McGinnity heard Chance, sprang off the bench, and tackled him before he could even reach second. Meanwhile, the fans, thinking the game was over, spilled onto the field in a rush for the exits. McGinnity grabbed the ball, and he threw it to the crowd. Chance appealed to umpire Hank O'Day, who ruled Merkel out because of interference from McGinnity. The game ended in a tie and had to be replayed when the two teams finished the season with an identical 98-55 record. The Cubs won the replay and the pennant, but this is the big thing, and I love it because a lot of people don't know this, but 19-year-old Merkel, perpetrator of the costliest blunder in baseball history, actually received a raise from Giants manager John McGraw and went on to become an excellent player. I love it. That was so great.
Yeah. That's true. And Christy Mathewson got deprived of a win there, and as a result, on the lifetime wins list, he is tied with Grover Cleveland Alexander with 373. Had he gotten the win, which he should have, he would have had 374.
That's unbelievable. Now, here's another story you put in, which I didn't even know about, and I thumbed through your book in a matter of 2 days, looking at everything. I mean, you got 1,000 illustrations and 10,000 items of stuff of information that, it's hard to even put this down. It reads just like, all right, well, what's next? This one was huge. 2 balls in play, and you cite the June 30th, 1959 game between the Cubs and Cardinals. And why don't we talk about Stan Musial? What happened to him?
Oh, yeah. Well, why don't you tell about that incident, too? Because you did a good job with the Merkel thing.
All right. Well, this is what happened. You know what's funny? You know what's funny, Dan? I get up at 3 o'clock in the morning because I got twin boys that are 9 years old and they're going to be 10. And you know what I said? By this time, like I used to tell people when they came to the office, half the day's gone by already. For some people,
I totally understand because I'm in the midst of 2 convention weeks. One finished yesterday, another one starts tomorrow. So it's a crazy time for me too.
Yeah, so this is what happened. The Cubs threw 2 balls to second baseman simultaneously in a bid to erase base runner Stan Musial of the Cardinals. And the baseball rules stipulate that the game be played with 1 ball at a time. The ball is often changed when it becomes discolored, like I mentioned before, or roughed up. But never is a new ball entered by the umpire until the old one is removed. And again, we have 2 balls in play. Musial was at bat with a 3-ball, 1-strike count when Chicago pitcher Bob Anderson delivered a pitch that home plate umpire Vic Delmore called ball 4. But Cub catcher Sammy Taylor argued that the ball hit Musial's bat and was therefore a foul, increasing the count to 3 balls and 2 strikes. I love the setup. Taylor did not give chase as the ball bounced towards the backstop. Delmore contended that the ball hit Taylor's glove, glanced off the umpire's arm, and rolled towards the screen. When Musial reached first, he heard teammates yell, "Run," and so he took off to second. If Delmore's call was correct, the ball was still in play. Third baseman Alvin Duck, who would later become infamous manager, raced in and threw to shortstop Ernie Banks. At the same instant, pitcher Anderson took a new ball which was given to him, which the umpire absentmindedly gave him during the argument over the ball four call, and threw to second. Now Anderson's throw sailed into center, and Musial, seeing the error, headed for third. He had gone only a few steps when Ernie Banks, holding the original ball, tagged him out. And then umpire Bill Jakowski ruled Musial out because he was tagged with the original ball. Now, how do you like that?
And we should mention Ernie Banks was then a shortstop. He hadn't moved to first base yet.
Yeah, that was in the 60s and stuff. Now, you also mentioned umpires, and 2 of the umpires, I speak to. I just saw Perry Barber up here in Boston. Let's talk about Perry. Why is she in the book?
Perry's a female umpire. Perry is a woman's name or a man's name, but she happens to be female. And she's actually umpired Major League Spring Training games. In fact, there was a game in Port St. Lucie where the Mets trained where she was the crew chief. And just to make Jay Horowitz, the Mets PR guy, a little bit crazier, Perry hired 3 other women. So when the umpires gathered at home plate for the exchange of the lineup cards and to talk about the ground rules, all of a sudden the umpires had ponytails draping down their back. Jay Horowitz went a little bit nuts in the press box.
Wow. And she is a trailblazer for women baseball. I love that I was a personal guest on Monday and met the ladies of the AAG PBL League of the 1940s, a league of their own in 50s. And it just a wealth of knowledge. Let's talk about Al Clark. You wrote a book with him a few years ago.
Yes, Al Clark was an umpire for a long time, 1976 to 2001. I had the pleasure of having him on Braves Banter last night. And he was the first umpire who wore glasses on a regular basis, the first Jewish umpire in the American League, because he started before the league staffs were merged, and a very independent, outspoken guy. He participated in many big events, such as Nolan Ryan's 300th win, Randy Johnson's first no-hitter, Cal Ripken's record-breaking game. So Cal Ripken's resume is really overflowing with big-time events. And he was also in the Earthquake World Series, 1989.
And he was the only umpire to actually have his name on the hat because he worked for the American League, and it said AL.
That's right. After they put AL on the hat, his name was on his hat. Very well said.
Let me ask you about 2 of probably the best. One's a manager, one's an umpire, McGraw and Bill Clem.
Both guys who had great longevity in the game. McGraw managed for 33 years with the New York Giants. And by the way, the day he retired was also the same day that Lou Gehrig hit 4 home runs in a game, the first time that happened in American League history. And Gehrig's 4 home runs got very little publicity because of McGraw's surprise announcement, because McGraw was like a god in New York, running the New York Giants. And Bill Clem was a great early umpire, when I say early in the game's history, and was so good at calling balls and strikes that he was permanently stationed behind the plate. And he's one of the few umpires in the Baseball Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and he was there for a long time too, Clem. He pretty much pioneered what we have today with the. Back then umpires, for God's sakes, you also mentioned that there were fights with umpires from the crowd and teammates.
Oh, very much so. George Magerkirk, there's a great picture in my book of George Magerkirk being attacked during a game. But there were a lot of fisticuffs, and obviously there was a lot of drinking in baseball, a lot of rowdyism. Major League Baseball has tried to clean it up somewhat, and I guess they've succeeded. The instant replay takes away all that confrontational atmosphere between umpires and players or umpires and managers. And I kind of miss that. I like when Earl Weaver or Billy Martin or Lou Piniella would argue with the umpire. That was part of the game. That was part of the entertainment. It was fun.
And you know, so I'm also part of the entertainment, which you point out. And I had Paul Dixon on my show. He wrote the new biography of Leo.
Yes, good books.
Yeah, you know, I had him on, and if you ever listen to my thing, great book. I read it earlier this year when it came out. In an interview, you mentioned, you know, again, bench jockey, and told you like the fact that Leo DeRocha. Let's talk a little bit about Leo.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned DeRocha because I want to point out to your listeners that Nice Guys Finished Last was the title of his autobiography. However, it was an inaccurate quote. The actual quote was Nice Guys Finished Eighth. He was talking to reporters about Mel Ott, manager of the New York Giants, when they were playing each other, and DeRocha said, look over at Ott, and he indicated the other dugout, and he said, such a nice guy, but they'll finish eighth for him. There are 8 teams in the league that year. And that quote got twisted into Nice Guys Finished Last, and it's actually in Bartlett's familiar quotations, even though the quote is not accurate.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, I mean, you know, I asked Paul Dixon at the end, I said, you know, Paul, in the end, did you like Leo after, you know, he goes through like all these changes? He's like, nah, as a human being, no, but as a coach and manager, yeah, he did like him. Now, let me ask you this. I ask everybody this question because historians are torn. We know the dead ball era ended in 1919, but there are those who would argue the ball never changed in 1920. They just outlawed spitballing and you know, a change of ball throughout the game. Was the ball created differently in 1920 to usher in the live ball era?
Well, periodically throughout baseball history, the ball has been changed. Either it was wound more tightly or more loosely. You could also argue that 1930 was an unusual year offensively. And if you look at the stats, I think that bears it out. The Philadelphia Phillies batted .315 as a team that year and still finished last. And the scores were just ridiculous. But you also have to remember, the ballpark, for the most part, the ballparks were much, much smaller than they are today. And that made a big difference in the scoring too. But the ball, the stitching of the ball and the manufacture and where it was manufactured, that has changed many times over the years. In 1920, there were huge changes in the wake of the Black Sox scandal. The first commissioner was appointed with Kennesaw Mountain Landis. And as you mentioned, many pitches were outlawed, including the spitball and the emery ball and the sign ball. And things changed because they were trying to clean up the game. But they also wanted to put fannies in the seats. And they thought more offense would bring more people. And that theory still holds today, by the way. More offense brings more people.
It does. And you know who architected that notion back in the 60s? Our good friend Charlie Finley. And
who should be in the Hall of Fame. What an oversight not to have him in the Hall of Fame.
Well, let's talk about Charlie, and let's talk about Larry McPhail, and let's talk about why colored balls never caught on.
Well, Charlie Finley probably was more of an innovator even than Bill Veeck, who's in the Hall of Fame, or Larry McPhail, but he's certainly in the same, cut from the same cloth, same mold. But Charlie did so many things that were criticized severely at the time he proposed them, and then later adopted. I mean, just colored uniforms, players with facial hair. He built something called the Pennant Porch in the ballpark in Kansas City, trying to emulate Yankee Stadium short right field. Mascots. He rode Charlie O. the Mule on the field before a game. He had an automatic mechanical rabbit that would pop up to give the umpires fresh balls. So many things that Charlie Finley did. And that green and gold, that garish green and gold, his teams won. He was his own general manager. He won 5 straight division titles, including 3 straight World Series. He definitely should be in the Baseball Hall of Fame, no question in my mind. And I don't care how abrasive he was. Plenty of other abrasive people are already in Cooperstown.
Yeah, I mean, they tried to get George Steinbrenner, but, you know, that's another story for another time. A lot of people don't know, Dan, that World War II changed baseball. You had over 500 players, and we're talking starters, you know, Greenberg, DiMaggio, Ted Williams. They all went to fight for the country. And, you know,
yes.
You do document the letter from Franklin Delano Roosevelt, you know, to Keenan Landis. Why was that important during the war?
It was a morale booster. In fact, the national anthem, which became the national anthem in 1931, was never played before games until 1942, and then it was introduced as a morale booster. So Major League Baseball was something that Franklin Roosevelt felt would boost the morale of people, and he wanted to keep it going, and that's why he wrote that famous letter. But you're right that just about all of the prominent players, most prominent players, went into the service. Warren Spahn, by the way, was the only player to win a battlefield commission during World War II, which is kind of impressive. And had he not gone in and served his 3.5 years, he would have won over 400 games, no doubt in my mind.
I think he was at the Battle of the Bulge when the Germans...
That's correct. He was at the Battle of the Bulge. And Bob Feller, you mentioned, he won 8 battle stars. 8 battle stars. That's just incredible.
And this is something that's interesting, which, again, I didn't know. They had substitute balls during World War II. This thing was made, and they were made by Spalding, and they had a granulated cork center and a shell of Balata.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of rationing going on during the war. They had to make do with what they had, so that's the reason for that.
You read this stuff and it's like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. All this stuff. Now, traveling before air flights, traveling before California baseball. Let's talk about the trains.
Yes, they were on the trains. In fact, I just saw again a few days ago the movie 8 Men Out, which was about the 1919 Black Sox scandal. And there was a lot of activity in that movie on the trains. And they showed the writers and the players on the same train and how they interacted with each other. But they really knew each other rather intimately because of that. You spent a lot of time on the trains. Even though there was no West Coast at that point, the furthest outpost really was St. Louis. St. Louis had teams in both leagues at that time. But the Dodgers and Giants and Padres and Mariners, all those teams came along later. So they spent a lot of time on trains before planes took over, and planes were so much faster, and that's how they're able to expand out west.
And some people forget they used to play cards on there and write their loved ones letters from the road and stuff. Stuff like if people have ever seen The Longest Day with John Wayne and a wonderful cast, and you see them on the boats just waiting to get into battle and stuff. And it's coming up June 6th in a few days, but they have like all these crap games where it's like a head of cabbage to money, and that's what you had. You had a camaraderie, and there was no free agency back then, so everyone pretty much stayed on a team unless the reserve clause said, hey, let's get rid of you, but only at the owner's thing. Hank Aaron and Babe Ruth, in your opinion, Mr. Bonds is not the heavyweight champion of home runs. Hank Aaron is. Let's explain.
I think a lot of people share that opinion, too, because Barry Bonds, he's a good example, and Roger Clemens as well. When you get older and your numbers get better, as Yogi Berra might say, there's something not kosher in the state of Denmark, because it just doesn't happen that way. When you get older, your numbers aren't supposed to get better. And when your head gets really big, as Bonds' head did, as Clemens' head did, that's the only part of your body you can't use conditioning to expand. Telltale signs of steroid abuse. And we all know what happened to Barry Bonds' trial, where his trainer basically refused to testify because, in my opinion, he was threatened by Barry Bonds. And now Barry Bonds was a batting coach last year for the Marlins. He got fired after 1 year. But the reason he was a coach, he is trying to get back in the good graces of the electors of the Hall of Fame. I don't think he will get in. Roger Clemens, the same story. And that whole crew, Rafael Palmeiro, Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire, there are just too many of these guys. Although it might be opening a crack with Pudge Rodriguez going in this year, because there were rumors about him too.
Him. Piazza just got in and Griffey, although both of them really weren't part of that hunt to do so. But when you look at the players like Aaron or Mickey Mantle or Darryl Strawberry, Strawberry had cocaine, but that's not going to help you. These guys were thin. Mantle, he was muscular, but for God's sakes, he had a home run that was nearly 600 feet out of Griffith Stadium.
Yeah, he was a tremendous player, but often injured, and that really hurt him. He hurt his knee early in his career. He stepped in a drain hole while playing the outfield, and that really set him back his whole career. Never really recovered.
And, you give a wonderful insight to, two players who might have combined for pitching stats, which would be like 300 game wins, but you also mentioned, and a lot of us forget, that Hammer and Hank and his brother Tommy, they hold the record for teammates with the Braves in the 60s as brothers for the most home runs ever hit.
That's right. They had the most home runs by brothers, even though Tommy just hit 13. Hank had 755, of course. And Hank Aaron, by the way, with Eddie Matthews, holds the record for home runs hit by teammates at 863, a record that does not get the attention that it really deserves.
I know. Now let me ask you this: we got John McGraw in your book. Do you think McGraw, even with his abrasive style, and boy, he was abrasive. I mean, do you think he might have been the greatest manager in Major League Baseball history?
He certainly won enough titles, but then again, they didn't have so many playoffs then. They didn't have any playoffs then, so that makes a difference. In fact, somebody said to me, why did the Braves win 14 division titles and only one World Series? Because there's so many playoffs to stop them on their way to the World Series. But John McGraw was very successful with that Giants team. But then again, they had big stars, Christy Mathewson and so many others. So having the stars helped. And in those days, there was no draft. You just, whatever money you had, you bought the players and you signed them. And it wasn't that expensive to sign players either. So good scouting supersedes everything else.
Now let's talk about Bobby Cox a little bit. A lot of people didn't know that his second run as manager of the Braves was his second stint. He was the manager before.
He was a manager. In fact, it was his first managing gig, and they were really the Bad News Braves back then. And I think they made a movie about that, didn't they, Ian? Remember the Bad News Bears? I think that was about the Braves. But when he came back, he was the manager of that worst to first team in 1991. What a turnaround. They went from having the worst record in the major leagues to a World Series berth, and that's the only time that ever happened in baseball history.
Yeah, and you know something? With the 91 series, I just had a show with Tim Wendell last week. Both, their opponent, Minnesota, and the Braves, with both the last place in 1990. And I remember, now, if you would have told me the next year, we'd probably have one of the best World Series with the Twins and Braves for 91. I would have thought you're crazy because that's how bad. But now, who did Cox take over from? Otis Nixon? I forget who was the manager at the time.
Russ Nixon.
Russ Nixon, yeah. I remember that because I think he was. I think Cox was the general manager at the time. And
yes, that's right. He was 5 years as GM, and he built a lot of those teams because he made great trades, great scouting, and really built up the team so that by 91 it was pretty strong. But Schuerholz, when he came along after the 1990 season, he added a lot of guys, Rafael Belliard and Sid Bream and Terry Pendleton, one of the best free agent signings in baseball history.
Yeah, and I mean, you know who else was good? Sid Bream. That was huge taking him.
Yeah, they signed Bream and Belliard, both from the Pirates, and very good defensive players. And that was really the key. The pitching wasn't that bad, but the defense was awful. And you repair the defense, you help the pitching.
And a lot of people don't realize that, again, the 91 Braves, they didn't have Maddox yet.
That's right.
They didn't have Maddox, and they would only get better when Maddox was signed in 92, and I remember that.
Oh, no. Maddox signed after the 92 season, came along in 93 with the Braves. But they didn't have Chipper either. Chipper didn't come along until 95.
Right. And you know what? I remember being so mad because I'm a huge Yankees fan. I was living in Brooklyn, New York. I was getting ready to move up here where I live now in Massachusetts. I was going into law school, and I thought it was a lot. They were going to offer Maddox exorbitant amount of money, and he took the less money, and he went with the Braves.
Well, he wanted to stay in the National League. He was more familiar with it then. But he also thought it would be less. Maddox is a very introverted, modest, quiet kind of a guy. And he thought New York was going to be too overwhelming for him. And he was probably right. So he did stay with the Braves. But the Braves are funny because they were considering, they were going to sign one of two guys, either Maddox or Barry Bonds. And they decided to go for Maddox. And look how it turned out.
Yeah, they won, with Cox, they won 14 divisions, right?
14. Yes, 14 straight. Never happened again.
No. And those, you gotta say, hey, you start out with like David Justice, and now he's getting old, but the Braves were able to do something that a lot of teams can't: replace the old veterans with good players that are coming up. And I think that's a learning lesson. I think a lot of teams now are learning that lesson. Especially the Yankees, they shipped all their stuff, and now look at the kids; they're doing good. Now let me ask you about this. This is a great thing. Dykes shoves Connie Mack. What's going on with there?
Yeah, Connie Mack managed the Philadelphia A's for just about 50 years. Couldn't fire himself because he owned the team. So he got into arguments occasionally, and, you know, Jimmy Dykes was one of his players with the Philadelphia A's, and they got into an argument one day. So there was a shoving match that ensued. It was very unusual. I mean, Connie Mack didn't even swear. But I'll tell you a funny story about Connie Mack that I loved. He wore a suit of clothes rather than a baseball uniform while he was in the dugout. So somebody once asked him, why don't you wear a uniform like all the other managers? And he said, I actually have a terrible temper, and I have a bad ball club. So I figured that if I wore a suit, I would sit on the bench after my team lost a game, and I would sit there and let them take their shower, and I'd sit in the dugout, and then I'd come into the clubhouse. So he was trying to cool off before he could, you know, level charges and yell at the players and all that stuff. It's a great story, but that's why he wore a suit.
Yeah, and you know, can you imagine the burning hot days in that suit with the button up to his neck? I don't know how he did it.
Oh, yeah. That was the style then. I guess that's why he was so thin.
Old age. Mr. Stengel, why was he fired in 1960? Let's talk about that.
Well, yeah, he won 10 pennants in 12 years with the Yankees, but he lost the World Series, a very excruciating World Series, to the Pirates. The Yankees really outscored the Pirates, winning 16-3, 12-0, but they lost that last game 10-9 on Mazeroski's home run. And after that, the Yankees fired Stengel, saying he was too old. But he was just 70. There have been many managers older than that. And so the Mets picked him up, and he was the first manager of the Mets. So Warren Spahn, who later joined the Mets, said, I played for Casey before and after he was a genius.
You know, you know something, people don't realize that, you know, he won the championship in the Pacific Coast League year before with the Oakland Oaks. And not only a lot of people on the East Coast paid attention, but there was no California baseball out there, like we mentioned before. And that was huge.
That's right. Joe DiMaggio played for the San Francisco Seals, and that's where he was discovered. So you're absolutely right.
You know,
but Casey Stengel was a master of platooning. I mean, he really perfected that art. He did it so well that he won every year.
Here's a question I ask people, and no one seems to know why. Why were the Yankees able to get, like, former, you know, big league players like Johnny Sane and others to, like, fill in the gaps where other teams couldn't get them?
Well, they made waiver claims for the most part, or they made purchases, and other teams felt that these guys wouldn't help them, that they were over the hill. But, you know, when these guys came to the Yankees and put on pinstripes, you get that little incentive to get the World Series money, which you could get from winning the pennant and going on to the World Series. And so it happens. In fact, I bet the same thing happens this year with Bartolo Colon, the oldest player in the majors at 44. Somebody's going to get him, and I bet he does well after that trade.
Yeah. You know, I mean, he has a rubber arm. I mean, you know, he could last in the league for a few years. The biggest trade ever, 17-player trade. What went on over here?
Yankees and Orioles. And they got some really good guys in that trade, the Yankees did. Bob Turley, the hero of the 1958 World Series, came in that trade from Baltimore. Don Larson, perfect game in the 1956 World Series, came in that 17-man trade. Great trade. And I do have a chapter on trades in my book, and that may be my favorite chapter. I just love trades, especially the old days.
Well, let's go into it a little bit then. You know, now with free agency after 75 with the Messersmith and McNally case, what was so great about those trades back in the old days? In fact, I think Yawkey and McPhail were going to swap Williams for DiMaggio in 47.
It was talked about, but they also realized that they would incur the wrath of their fans if they did that. But both of them would have rewritten the baseball record book if they had better ballparks to hit in, because Williams was a left-handed hitter who would have thrived in Yankee Stadium, and DiMaggio, a right-handed hitter, who would have thrived with a short ball in left field, the Green Monster in Fenway. So, but they think, you know, you can't really trade matinee idols. However, in 1960, right on the eve of the season opener, Frank Lane traded Rocky Colavito, the home run king, for Harvey Keene, the batting champion. And that trade had repercussions for years. Cleveland fans never forgave him.
Oh, and another thing you put in here, which was huge back in 1965, was the interleague trading, and I think the trade of Frank Robinson epitomizes that whole feeling.
Oh yeah, he won the Triple Crown right away the minute he got to Baltimore. And the Reds, when they traded Frank Robinson, they said he was an old 30. How can you be an old 30? It's just ridiculous. One of the worst trades of all time, certainly. Although Milt Pappas might disagree.
And yeah, you know what I saw in here, and I never seen this picture before. And I was a Topps card collector. Dick Allen in a Braves uniform.
Yeah, he was actually traded to the Braves and refused to report because he felt Atlanta and the Deep South were not places he wanted to be. So he refused to report and had to rework that trade, and then he was traded to the White Sox.
And you know, so one of my favorites is because I got the Facebook page on broadcasters. You give a whole chapter on this, but what I want to talk about is a lot of people don't know, but which I've learned maybe about 10, 15 years ago, a lot of these early games, they were recreated. Let's talk about that.
Oh, I loved listening to Les Kiter on WINS. He would recreate games just by the telegraph. And if the telegraph stopped for some reason, he would make up action. He would say it's raining or something, anything for a delay, or there's a brawl. But the telegraph would say, like, B1, S1, ball 1, strike 1. And it would just have that little information. And the announcer, the recreator, had sound effects. He would hit a pencil against a block of wood to simulate the sound of a bat, stuff like that. He had crowd noise on tape. And Les Kiter was just about the best at doing that. And he did it for WINS radio in New York after the New York Giants became the San Francisco Giants. And it was wonderful listening to it. He had a great voice.
And you know, you move to a great chapter here, and so much of this is up for debates, but it doesn't matter which way you go because you're a winner either way. The game's most memorable moments, and you gotta say, look, you know, number one probably is Hank Aaron's pursuit of Babe Ruth's records. Another two, same year, a 406 hitting average by Ted Williams and a 56-game hitting streak by DiMaggio. Let's talk about what you think about the game's most memorable moments.
Well, I got to think you have to rank right at the top Bobby Thompson's pennant-winning home run in 1951 because it capped an amazing comeback by the New York Giants. The Brooklyn Dodgers had a 13.5-game lead in the middle of the summer, and the Giants just kept grinding away and winning. And the Dodgers were tooling along at 500, and the Giants caught them and beat them in that best-of-3 unscheduled playoff. And Thompson hit that home run in the bottom of the ninth inning with 2 men on base in the last game of the playoffs. It was amazing. It looked like the Dodgers were going to win because they took a 4-1 lead into the ninth inning with Don Newcomb on the hill, and it looked like that game was over. But it wasn't, especially after they changed to Ralph Branca.
And I think the story behind that was, well, there's two stories behind it. One of it was a Brooklyn Dodgers fan actually recorded Russ Hodges' famous call because he thought that the Dodgers would beat the Giants and show his friend the tape that, look, this is great, but it ended up backfiring, becoming probably one of the most famous calls ever. But also during that year, DeRocha was stealing signals. We know that for a fact. We don't know, and even if he did know Bobby Thompson, what the pitch would be, chances are it probably wouldn't have affected the outcome. A lot of people have said. What's your view on that?
Well, it's very interesting that Roy Campanella was sidelined and Rube Walker was catching, and I think that was a factor also for the Brooklyn Dodgers. But if the Giants were stealing signals, as has been alleged by Ralph Branca and others, why did Clem Labine pitch a 10-0 shutout at the Polo Grounds in the second game of that series?
Yeah, exactly. You know, that's what I said. And you know, I don't think there was any. At least we know during the season it was, but I don't think there. I love the fact that you put in the Cincinnati Redlegs because you have all these different emblems. One of them was the Sox. After World War I, they put the patriotic Sox thing, but the Cincinnati Redlegs. I mean, that was huge. You want to explain to the folks why that was put in?
Yes, because they didn't want their team to be called the Reds because that was a reference to communists in Russia and other places, but primarily in Russia. And there's a great fear of the Bolsheviks. So they didn't want to be called the Reds and have any political aspersions cast at them. So they just changed it to Redlegs, and wore red socks.
Yeah, I mean, it's, just to get off. Now, superstitions you got a chapter on, which is some of the more memorable ones that you think are just great.
Well, Wade Boggs had a chicken fetish. He would eat chicken because he figured the protein was really going to help him. And he actually wrote a book called Fowl Tips, F-O-W-L. It was a cookbook, Fowl Tips. And Boggs had all kinds of other superstitions, like you had to take batting practice at the exact same time. So Bobby Cox once changed the scoreboard clock deliberately to throw Boggs off. It didn't work, though. It was in Toronto when Bobby was managing up there. But Ralph Kiner told me that he didn't step on the white lines. I said, weren't you superstitious? He said, well, I didn't step on the white lines. I wasn't superstitious, but I didn't want to take any chances.
Oh, that was great. Let me ask you about spring training. How different was it back in your olden days as compared to now?
Well, I've been going every year since 1971, and even since then, there's a huge difference. It was more relaxed, more casual, more open. Players gave autographs more freely. Now baseball, unfortunately, has become more of a business, and players are more reluctant to give autographs because they think fans asking for them might sell them. In the old days, they knew if a fan asked for an autograph, it was because he liked that player, and he would keep it. But things have changed quite a bit in baseball. The memorabilia craze has changed things a lot. But it used to be much, much more casual. And now there's more security. There's more of everything. It just makes it a little bit harder, but it's still the best time of the year.
And, of course, we had challenges to Major League Baseball. Two of them, well, three of them I'll mention. The Federal League, the Mexican League, which was huge in the late 40s, because they were in competition with my third thing, which was the Negro Leagues, and they were stealing not stealing, but buying players from both leagues. That Commissioner Happy Chandler says, hey, if you go to Mexico, if you ever come back, you're going to be barred for a few years.
Yeah, that's true, but that ban was eventually modified somewhat. And these guys, Sal Magli was the biggest guy probably who went over to the Mexican League. But that was just another example of outlaw leagues. The Federal League was probably the biggest one. That lasted for 2 years. And a lot of players jumped from the major leagues to the Federal League. In fact, Connie Mack had to break up his Philadelphia A's twice. And the first time was because of competition from the Federal League.
That ended up going to court, Supreme Court, whereby they lost eventually. And this was years after the league folded. But the court's ruling still stands today from 1922. The antitrust laws don't apply to Major League Baseball.
Yeah, that's true. And I think it's probably time to rescind that.
Well, we got to get a case going, Dan. We got to get a case going with that. I don't mind taking it to the Supreme Court. I have my license to practice this. So let me ask you this. This is great. And not a lot of people don't know about this unless you read Colorblind by author Tom Dunkel. Satch broke away from the Pittsburgh Crawfords. He went to the Bismarck team and played in semi-pro ball. But there was a potion he used to take. It's great.
Oh, Satchel was great. He had all those famous sayings, don't eat fried foods and don't look back, something might be gaining on you. He had all these ideas, and he had talk about rubber arm. You mentioned that with Bartolo Colon. Satchel Paige really had a rubber arm. I mean, he could pitch just about endlessly, and he pitched very late in life. I mean, he was said to be 65 years old when he pitched 3 innings in a game in the American League as a publicity stunt for the Kansas City A's. Charlie Finley, by the way.
Yeah, but that was, if I'm not mistaken, and then he went to the Braves of all things to, I think, just get his pension, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. He never pitched for the Braves, but he did go there and he hung out in the dugout. He wore a uniform, and that was all you needed to do.
Yeah, we got that. I love the fact that you put, and I love this because this is one of my memories of watching This Week in Baseball, Morgana, the kid-sing bandit.
Morgana Roberts, a exotic dancer, she called herself, from Atlanta, who made a career out of jumping over the fence and hugging the best player in the field, like George Brett, Pete Rose, and many others. And she would certainly create a stir. She would get arrested, spend the night in jail, but get a lot of publicity for her nightclub.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. I could talk about this with you all day. Is there something that I mentioned that I didn't mention that maybe you wanted to come on the show and mention, like, I don't know, what's your favorite? Ballparks I know are a huge part of this, or something that maybe you want to get across to the listeners.
Well, I want to get across to listeners that the New Baseball Bible is the baseball book bargain of the year. 424 pages, oversized illustrated pages, for just $17.99. You will not find such value anywhere else. And you can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, major booksellers. But great gift for Father's Day, and that's right around the corner.
That's right. And, I've been honored to have you on the show. I wanted to get you on the show for a while. Hold the line. What's next for you? What are you working on now? You're always working on something.
Well, I do have some ideas, but I'm working for USA Today Sports Weekly. I'm writing for their Hall of Fame induction preview issue.
All right.
So I'm interviewing Bagwell, BGO, Raines, Ryan. Talked to Bobby Cox, Chipper Jones, Pud Rodriguez, and I'm putting together the cover stories for their Hall of Fame induction preview issue.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Hold the line, Dan. I'm going to end the show, and
Okay.
I'll talk to you for about 30 seconds.
Okay.
Folks, you got to go out. Even then, this is a remarkable thing. This is like one of the stuff where you just crack open a page. You don't have to read it from cover to cover all at once. It's just eye candy for any baseball fan. Get it for Father's Day. I'm sure the baseball person in them will love this book. Not to mention, Dan put in the presidents in the book. And what's more American besides apple pie than baseball? As always, folks, I'm Ian Kahanowitz. Thank you, Dan Schlossberg, for being on the show. And in the immortal words of Edward R. Murrow, good night, folks. Good luck. We'll see you next time.